Perhaps the most pressing foreign policy issue facing the Biden White House is Iran. What to do about their aggressively expanding nuclear research program, bigger stockpiles, faster centrifuges, new underground construction, a higher level of uranium enrichment. With me now is Daniel Pomerantz, the CEO of Honest Reporting, and Mark Schulman, editor-in-chief of History Central. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Daniel, I want to start with you with the fact that Iran now enriching uranium to a purity of 20%. It is a very short technical step from 20% to 90%, which is weapons grade. Don't you have to negotiate with them? Don't you have to deal with this fact?
Well, there's nothing wrong with negotiating and with having a deal. The question is whether you're going to get a deal that's good and that's effective. The prior existing Iran deal was opposed not only by 78% of Israelis, but by almost every country in the Arab League. And you know, when you get Israel and the Arab League agreeing on anything, it's time to listen up and take notice.
So what's wrong with the Iran, as Daniel mentioned, a lot of opposition to the Iran deal. Why should Biden even consider going back to it?
Okay, first of all, we have to do something to stop the situation. The reality was the reason the United States entered the Iran deal was because they wanted to stop the Iranian nuclear program. It was far from a perfect deal. I don't think Secretary of State Kerry is the best negotiator in history, but the reality is the Iranians are also difficult negotiators. You don't get everything you want in a deal. We are in a worse situation. Trump administration and Netanyahu pushing him to do so, to walk away from the deal, we've ended up with no deal. The moment the Iranians understood that Trump would not use force and was just going to try economic sanctions that have never worked any time in history, almost in any place, the game was up. And they're able to move forward.
So are we in a worse situation now? And if so, isn't that a defense of the deal?
Well, the true way to analyze what kind of situation we're in is by a measure called breakout time. How close is Iran actually from being able to develop a bomb? And once they do, there's not much you can do because they can retaliate with nuclear force. Right now, it doesn't seem that the breakout time is significantly less than it was during the deal, but it's hard to tell because some Iranian scientists have been killed recently, and that tends to increase the breakout time.
But we have the weapons program itself has expanded in the last 4 years. I mean, more centrifuges, better centrifuges, underground research. It's an aggressive level of nuclear research that didn't exist when the deal was in place.
Well, the level of research has become increasingly aggressive, but even beforehand, and we've discovered from that hoard of intelligence material that Israel pulled out of Iran, that there was aggressive research even before. It's just simply continued.
They didn't have any nuclear material based on the deal. The material had to be moved out of the country. They've rebuilt their stockpile. The situation may not be worse than before the deal, although I think it's probably a little bit worse than before the deal, but it's certainly worse than during the time of the deal.
Well, we don't actually know that because the deal didn't allow us to actually inspect military bases, which is the one place you would put a military weapons program.
There were restrictions on where inspectors had access to.
Right, but besides that, it was a very intrusive inspection regime. Look, I'm not going to defend to say the deal was 100%, but it was better than no deal. Unless you're willing to use military force, you're going to get the best deal you can. Now, the advantage of the Biden administration is they believe in multilateralism. They believe in using other countries. You cannot succeed in a deal like this against Iran all by yourself.
But the Arab League also opposed to this deal.
The Arab League is opposed to the deal, but depends on what the deal ends up being. The reality is, though, we need some sort of deal, or we're going to have to go to war, and we don't want to go to war.
It's not clear that we necessarily need a deal. Over the past 4 years, Iran has had such a lack of inflow of money from their oil revenue, and they don't have much else going on, that is created, we're on the verge of a Lebanese spring, which may not happen if Iran gets that money back. Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, is on the run, and Iran's power in Syria has been decreasing because they're simply not able to act in the region in the way they used to.
How many years have we talked about the fact that the Iranian regime is on its last legs? There's going to be a revolution. They're going to lose power. This has been going on since 1979.
Well, it certainly wasn't going on in 2015-16.
It was before that, though. That's part of the question. They were under pressure to enter into the deal because of the economic situation.
Well, exactly.
Now, the reality is how far you can get, how good a deal, I don't know.
But the influence of Iran proxy militias in the region, has at least the pressure campaign done damage to Iran's aggression in the Middle East through their proxy militias?
It hasn't in Yemen. It hasn't in Yemen. It has in Syria, obviously. We've been attacking Syria nonstop for the last 2 years.
And it has in Lebanon.
Iran. And Lebanon is unclear where Lebanon's going to end up. I mean, Lebanon could fall apart and become Somalia, too, just as easily.
Is it worrisome for you that, in many respects, Joe Biden is bringing in the same players that were around him, with Iranian policy, even if they're slightly different positions. John Kerry is going to be back. Jake Sullivan, the negotiating team for the Iran deal, they're coming back.
Well, in a vacuum, that might be problematic, but there are unconfirmed reports that he's also bringing in a team of Israeli experts to help advise him. Now, how much attention he pays to them is the question. But if he can get Israel on board and the Arab League on board, that could result in a deal that actually is
part of the problem last time was Netanyahu came out against the deal before it would have been finalized, and he cut off any discussions with the United States about any of the details of the deal. And he was not there at the table. He could have been at the table, but he decided for internal political reasons that it was more important to go speak in front of Congress than to get a better deal if necessary. This time, hopefully he's learned his lesson, because this is the beginning of an administration and not the end of administration. And if Israel learns how to engage the Biden administration correctly, then I think we'll end up probably with a better deal. But again, the Iranians are the other party to this deal.
Yeah.
And so we need to find a way of getting the best possible deal.
Was there a lesson to
the biggest lesson that I've learned from the last 4 years is that the sanctions shouldn't be tied to nuclear ambitions. They should be tied to terrorism and to proxies, because a side effect of having these sanctions in place has been a reduction in Iran's power throughout the region and an increase in peace and stability throughout the region. Iran should not go nuclear, but should still not be allowed to receive and spend that kind of money on terrorism.
All right, we'll have to leave the discussion here. I want to thank our guests as we talk about probably the most important and pressing foreign policy concern in the first 100 days of the Biden White House. Again, Biden's inauguration just days away. Daniel Pomerantz, Mark Schulman, thank you both so much for being part of the discussion.